Okay, so now in the next section, which is 6.3, where we're going to create context and relationships between requirements. So the first step that we're going to do is we're going to open up the product requirement structure again. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to define our context scope. So what we're going to do is we're going to drill down to the core development. We're going to go back to our feature requirement, and we're going to go to the adaptive cruise control, and we're going to open this so that this will be the top level node in the ACE structure. So to do that, select it, click on open, and now you should see all the requirements that we created in the previous step should show up here under the adaptive cruise control. So the next step that we need to do in order to create a context is use what is called the save bookmark or save context, working context. In previous versions of Active Workspace, it used to be save bookmark, and this version of Active Workspace is called save working context. We're going to do this. We're going to give it a name, and that name will be create relationships for requirements and functions. And now you notice you have some additional buttons here, radio buttons, and that's if you want others to be able to view your context, or if you want others to edit your context. In this example here, I'm going to say others can view, but they're not going to be able to edit my work for the time being. So I'm going to go ahead and click on save, and it's going to take that structure and it's going to make that structure as a child under this save context. Now, why is this important? Because we have to have the ability to be able to bring in multiple structures and create relationships between those multiple structures. And the way to do that is using the save working context. Now, this works very similar as what we had in the rich client, which was called collaboration context. And collaboration context was another mechanism to allow multiple structures to be under one context view in order to create relationships between those structures. So this is the way we handle this process inside of Active Workspace. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to add another structure under our save context. So to make sure to do this, make sure that your newly created bookmark or save working context is selected and that there is nothing after the breadcrumb. Now what we're going to do is we're going to add a child to that save context. And you'll know it's a save context when you get this little window icon representing, each block representing a structure. I will tell you that there is a maximum number of structures you can put under a save working context before you'll run into a problem, and that is 5. Once you go beyond 5 structures, the ACE will not be able to load the save working context, and your diagrams will start loading incorrectly and getting many error messages as you load them. So now we're going to do a search for that feature because we want to create the relationships between the requirements and the functions. And in our example here, the feature holds all the functions. So I'm going to search for FE0 or dash 000003, and it returned back that adaptive cruise control, which is what we pinned to the desktop. Another mechanism we can use is we can go back to the desktop, copy and paste it, which will show up in the palette, and we'll use that later when we do other contexts. So I'm going to add this, and you'll notice immediately that it added that object the feature under my saved context. Now I'm going to resave this context to make sure that nothing happens to my feature and it's part of that structure. In addition, I showed you a little shortcut about how to manage bookmarks. Now, since I have a feature object here, on my feature object you will notice there's a feature mapping tab. And under that feature mapping tab, it's managing all my context related to that feature. So in this example, I want to be able to attach this context under my feature mapping for that feature, for the context views, because it's still another view that is related to this adaptive cruise control feature. So to do that, I'm going to go back to my create relationships for requirements and functions. That's the context that I saved. I'm going to hit copy. I'm going to come back down to the adaptive cruise control. And the reason I'm doing it this way is so I don't have to go back to the home page, copy, and come back, reload the context, paste it. You don't have to do that. I don't need to leave the screen to do this activity. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go click on paste. And now that save context is now part of my feature, so that I can always come back, since I load the feature first all the time, I can always go back to that context for that particular activity that I need to look at information. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to switch to the architecture tab. And the architecture tab gives us the ability to do modeling, create relationships, and allows us to do this graphically on the display. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on my feature, and you can see my feature block has showed up. I am going to expand the children under that feature. And you remember in the classroom that I told you that once the block goes off the screen and I don't see all the information, I can come over to the white space, double click with mouse button 1, and it will recenter everything to fit on the screen. Now I'm going to turn on the adaptive cruise control by clicking on the icon. Remember I said in the classroom that in order to turn these objects on in the diagram, you must click on the icon. It will not work if you click on the text. So click on the icon, double click in the white space, and now you can see that both blocks, here's my feature in all its functions, and here is my top level requirement for the adaptive cruise control. Now we're going to begin by creating our first relationship, and our first relationship is going to be with this top level requirement, the adaptive cruise control, to the adaptive cruise control feature. To do this, we're going to click on Start Authoring, and then I'm going to come down to the relation controls. In the relations controls, under the relationship section, I want to create a requirement link. And you'll know this by the little pencil icon. Now I'm in authoring mode. If I double click it again, I'm in multiple authoring modes, which is indicated by the double pencil. In this example here, though, I only need one relationship, and I want to be able to draw that line once you see the plus sign show up on your box, and I want to be able to create the relationship to the feature, which is the other plus sign that you see. Once that is created, now you see that that relationship has been created. In addition, I also showed that once I turn on the labels, I can see the labels, and it will tell me that that adaptive cruise control is related to the adaptive cruise control ACC feature. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to expand the children for the requirement, and we're going to link the requirement to the functions. Now, to start this process, I'm just going to hide this requirement. Now the other thing I could do is I could span these children out and do it this way, but in this example what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide this, and the system's going to come back and say, do you really want to change your view? And the answer is yes, I do want to hide that object. Now you'll notice that that requirement object has disappeared. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to turn on the requirements, the functional requirements that are under the top level requirement for the adaptive cruise control. So much like before, I'm going to turn on set speed. Set speed shows up, and I want to create the relationship between this function and this requirement. So it's still on authoring mode. In this example here, I'm going to double click because I'm going to create multiple relationships between all of these requirements, or author multiple relationships with all of these requirements related to their function. So here we'll start out with set speed, and to make it simple for this exercise, I made the requirements the same name as the function. And you will notice that some of them will not have a related a relationship. Either the function doesn't exist or the requirement doesn't exist. So by going through this process, you will figure out which ones doesn't have a function or which one doesn't have a requirement. So I'm going to finish creating the relationships and then we'll come back. Now I created the relationships for my requirements to my functions. I did notice that, as I mentioned before, there are some functions that are not created. And then the first example that I'm going to go with is this detect roads sign. So what I need to do is I need to author a function under this feature and create the relationship to the requirement. To do this, I'm going to switch my authoring to a function. If you click anywhere inside this green box, I will create a child, a function child, under that feature. And you can notice that it has a little plus sign waiting for mouse button 1 in order to create that child. So I'm going to click mouse button 1. It's asking for the name of the function. In this example, it's detect road sign. Then I'm going to hit enter, and the system has gone off and created that function under that feature. I'm going to come back to my requirement link, and now I'm going to create the requirement link to that function. Now you'll notice the view is getting cluttered, and I want to clean up this view to see if there's any other functions and requirements that are not allocated yet. So to do this, I'm going to come up here under my view tool, and I'm going to click left to right again to clean up the diagram. Now what you've seen is that I have one requirement without a function, and I have two functions without a requirement. For this exercise, I'm not going to continue to create the requirement, the two additional requirements and one additional function, but I wanted you to be aware that when you clean up the view, you do get some visual indication on what's been allocated and what hasn't been allocated from this view. Obviously there's another method that we would like to see come into Active Workspace, which is the matrix view, in order to create these relationships. But since we don't have that, this is a mechanism that you can use to make sure that your relationships are created between your objects. So the last step that I want to do for this section before we move to section 7, which is system modeling, is I want to be able to pin my bookmark, my saved context, to the gateway page or the home page. So I'm going to click until I see that I have no children after the breadcrumb here for to create relationships for requirements and functions, and I'm going to pin that to my home page. Now when I go back to the home screen, I now see that that context is now on my home page, and I can always come back to it as my day-to-day work activity to either refine requirements, update requirements, update the functions, create new relationships. I can always come back to that view. In addition, I can go to the feature and just go to the feature map and open the context view from the feature. So both of these mechanisms are quick and easy ways to get to those views that you want.